Hi, I'm Bob Humphrey, Vice President of the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine, with my co-host David Trahan, who's the Executive Director of SAM. And we have a couple of guests in for this issue, this version of SAMCAST. We're going to talk about a creature that is one of the smallest members of Maine's animal community, but potentially one of the most devastating or potentially harmful. Introduce yourselves, and then let's talk about what we're going to do.
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Krista West. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Forest Products Council. Maine Forest Products Council is the trade organization that represents Maine's forest industry. We represent the pulp and paper mills, the sawmills, secondary processors, foresters, loggers, truckers, and commercial forest landowners that manage 8 million acres of the state of Maine.
Thank you, and thanks for having me as well. My name is Brittany Shapak. I'm an entomologist with the Maine Forest Service, and I work with the Forest Health and Monitoring Department. So we do a lot of the trapping and the monitoring for various insects in the state of Maine.
So you sort of just took the lid off the box, and an entomologist would be concerned with insects, and we're going to talk about the spruce budworm. I did very little homework before this, but my understanding is the 70s and 80s, they destroyed something like 7 million acres of forest habitat in Maine.
They did.
And a 40-year cycle brings us back to a potential peak. So give us a little history and then bring us up to the present.
Yeah, so it's quite the insect. It is native to the state of Maine. A lot of folks think that it's an invasive species, but it's actually always been here, and it's evolved with our trees and our plant community that we have here. And in the 70s and the 80s that you mentioned, we did have a pretty severe outbreak of spruce budworm, where essentially a lot of the spruce and the fir trees ended up dying as a result of the damage from this caterpillar. And it is the caterpillar form that we are typically talking about when anyone's talking about spruce budworm. It is a moth. It's not like we don't care about the moth. The flying moth is important too, but it's really the caterpillar or the larvae that have very voracious appetites, and they do eat a lot of the spruce and the fir.
So when I was young, I first got married, now 63, I got to see it firsthand. For those that are listening, I was also a self-employed logger for 40 years. I still do that part-time. When I went north, of course, I was used to seeing this older growth forest, cutting operations here and there. Most of them were small. And I had heard about this infestation and what it was doing to the forest, so I wanted to see it firsthand. And all I can remember is the visuals of coming up over mountains and seeing nothing but red. The forest was dead. It was like being in a tree graveyard. And as a logger, I knew that there's only so much time before you lose that tree completely. It has no value except for biomass. And I said to myself, what a catastrophic event. It's going to change the forest forever. And I think it has. It changed the way they've managed the forest. I guess managing strictly for fir and spruce on some lots has changed. So I want to talk a little bit about what this next wave might mean, because if it means the same thing it did back then we could be looking at another catastrophe. So fill us in a little bit.
So as you mentioned, the last spruce budworm outbreak was severe. It covered 7 million acres of the state of Maine. And what we saw, it's called the spruce budworm, but it really prefers fir trees. Among fir trees, there was upwards of a 94% mortality of fir trees on the landscape. Upwards of a 94% mortality of fir trees on the landscape, and spruce suffered 33 to 66% mortality on the landscape. As a result, there was significant efforts to either pre-salvage or salvage timber that was going to be lost to the budworm, which resulted in large clear cuts that then led to 2 clear-cutting referendums and the Forest Practices Act, which shapes the way that forestry is operated in Maine today. So yes, very impactful, very much a part of the state and a part of our landscape, especially up in the unorganized territories.
So I want to add to that, because at the time when I was a logger, and I was also an activist. I worked for Mary Adams against those referendums. And what I think happened was those folks that wanted a northern Maine forest to be a park took advantage of what was happening. Had you in the forest products industry not acted, the forest fire that could have happened with all of that dead wood, millions of acres of dead wood, could have devastated northern Maine had that caught fire. I think that what you did at the time as an industry was a huge favor to the state of Maine, because that could have burnt northern Maine to the ground.
It absolutely could have, and we haven't talked about it yet, but Quebec started with their current round of spruce budworm outbreak around 2006. At the time, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the early intervention strategy that's been invented in New Brunswick and resulted in their treatment and now ours this time around in Maine. So they didn't have EIS yet, so they did what's called the foliar protection strategy, which is what we did last time around as well, where you target high-value stands to try to keep them alive long enough to salvage the timber before it inevitably succumbs to the spruce budworm. As a result, now Quebec, 20 years into it, has 33 million acres of deforested trees as a result of the spruce budworm. And they're treating about 2 million acres a year, trying to, catch up with the curve that is long gone. So in Maine, last summer and the summer before, we had a number of air quality advisory days that were the result of smoke that has followed the spruce budworm, with wildfires that have been an issue up there. They're also seeing wildfires following the budworm in Minnesota, which has a similar forest structure to Maine, and similarly has been contending with a spruce budworm outbreak now for a number of years.
Excuse me, David.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to digress too much, but you both said a couple things that clicked in my head. You mentioned, Krista, that previous practices affected cutting practices and regulations on the forest industry. It seemed like a good idea, a feel-good thing at the time, to go from large clear cuts to smaller strip cuts, patch cuts, that sort of thing. In hindsight now, what we're finding is that may not necessarily be the case. That was directed at species like forest nesting neotropical migrant birds. And we find that by creating a lot of little cuts and strips, we create a lot of edge, which supports fewer, less diverse array of species, and you lose those forest interior species, which are more at peril. And also, there was some thought that might have to do benefit to lynx habitat, and we're finding out that they actually like the cutting. The more the better, because that's where their number one prey, the snowshoe hare, lives. Are there benefits in terms of managing insects with fewer larger cuts versus more smaller cuts?
I'll say if we were still in a foliar protection position today, I think that you're likely right that the smaller cuts and more of the edge habitat would be a challenge. There's just a certain economy of scale when you're treating a forest to have a large block of forest that's part of the treatment plan. But what we're finding from the early intervention strategy, now that we had it last year for the first time on a landscape scale, is that the benefits of the program are going far beyond just the actual treatment center. So because the chemicals that are being used to treat for spruce budworm are so narrowly focused, they have to be ingested, they only affect caterpillars, they're very temporary on the landscape, they're completely gone within 2 weeks, which means we have to time it just right so that the spruce needles are out, the fresh needles for the year are out just at the right level, and that the budworm are out and also feeding on them because they have to be ingested. But it also means that all the natural predators to the spruce bud treatment blocks, we had a 94% decrease in spruce budworm. But within a kilometer of a treatment block, we had I wrote it down, 81% decrease in adjacent areas, because the lack of spruce budworm in the treatment areas pushes all of the native pests of the spruce budworm out into the buffer areas. So the benefit of the program, although we treated 240,000 acres of the 308,000 acre infestation last year, we had a 3.1 fold reduction across the whole landscape of spruce budworm because of it.
Can I ask you a few questions? Maybe the Forest Service could answer these. Do you act as an oversight function for the spraying? And I bring this up. I believe Senator Collins helped secure some federal funding, and I know that the legislature has put forward some proposals to help. It seems like Governor Mills was supportive of getting ahead of this. Can you tell me a little bit about your role at the Forest Service in overseeing the spraying, the management, and sort of what you see? Can we stop this thing?
Yeah, so a little bit more on the role. The Maine Forest Service essentially acts as folks who are experienced, knowledgeable in forestry and in entomology as well. So the state of Maine, the Maine Forest Service, is not the ones doing the actual spray operation. That would be the Maine Response Budworm Coalition. However, we do work very closely together to make sure that any kind of spraying that is ongoing has multiple checks and balances, so it's not just things that are going on without the state's awareness. Yeah. So we do help with those decisions about areas that are eligible for the treatments, and we also help with the funding as well. And
Sure.
so a lot of that is public communications. And
yeah. When will you start the spraying? And I understand it's going to happen this summer. When will you start the spraying, and what triggers the time period? And I think you touched on it, Krista. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the timeline, how this will happen.
Yeah, so timeline-wise, it is, like as Krista mentioned, it's going to be dependent on the bud development. So the actual needles of these spruce and the fir trees need to be emerged enough so that it gives something for the treatments to stick onto. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the actual caterpillar, the spruce budworm, needs to be active and feeding on the needles. Mm-hmm. So that is step 1 and step 2, essentially. And step 3 is that there needs to be good weather. So right now up in Fort Kent on today, it's very cold and it's very rainy and it's windy. And these are not good application days, because we do want to ensure that when the helicopters are up there applying the actual insecticides, that it is going where it is meant to go. And so treatment timing is very, very particular and specific to that.
Yeah. If I were just driving the North Woods of Maine right now, I would look up in the trees and wouldn't be able to perceive any sort of problem. So how do you know that there's a problem? How do you evaluate the size of the problem?
Yeah.
So in 2013, around that time, Maine created the Spruce Budworm Task Force that brought together the Maine Forest Service, Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, U.S. Forest Service, the university, and commercial landowners all together to plan for this inevitable outbreak that we knew was coming our way. And as a result, in 2015, landowners started a wide-scale monitoring program across the landscape. And then a few years later, in 2021, with funding from CFRU and the U.S. Forest Service, we developed our own spruce budworm lab right up in Orono at the University of Maine. And this has allowed they're called L2s, so for about 8 months of the year, spruce budworm is in the life cycle phase of what's referred to as an L2, where it's not actively feeding. We're able to go out on the landscape with foresters and collect branch samples, send them back to the lab, and the lab does an analysis to tell how many L2s are on each branch. And once they hit a certain threshold, which is 7 per branch, then it indicates that that is an area where the spruce budworm population is starting to build. And once it crosses that threshold, it builds very quickly.
Yeah. Being a logger, having sold a load of fir last winter, a salvage operation from some wind damage, I was shocked at how low the price was for pulpwood. And barely broke even. Couldn't give the landowner what I normally would give the landowner. One of my fears is that if we do have an outbreak in which it kills a significant amount of fir in particular, that means that in order to salvage, you're going to be flooding the market with pulpwood that already has virtually no value. Have you prepared for a worst case scenario where we don't really have the market to absorb large and I mean, salvage type logging operations and how much they put out? What are we going to do, Krista, if this goes bad?
I mean, you're absolutely right that is a major concern for landowners, especially when you consider that during the last outbreak we had 12 pulp mills in the state of Maine that were predominantly softwood mills. Now we have 3, and they're predominantly hardwood mills. They do still use softwood in the mix, however, it's predominantly hardwood. So there's a big need right now for low-grade softwood market. So I'm not sure that cutting our way out of this would be a reality, even if we were allowed to, which is not anybody's preference. Because as you mentioned, last time around, there was this large wall of cheap salvage wood, and this time, and as soon as that wall passed, then there was a shortage of that fiber. The market's corrected itself in losing those mills, and that there was enough demand still to continue operations, but we're not in a position to cut our way out of this.
Well, even if you did, it would be temporary, meaning even if we could absorb it, maybe move some out of state or whatever, then that volume on the landscape is then significantly decreased. So why would a mill want to start up in Maine if your production of softwood, which they would need in paper production, suddenly doesn't have the volume on the landscape, and then you have to wait 20 years for it to be back to a mature level to harvest?
I mean, honestly, just the permitting realities, I don't think that we're going to see any new pulp mills coming into the state, both between the permitting, regulatory realities, but also the pulp market in and of itself globally is, especially for softwood, it's a very, very challenging market. There's a lot of cheaply produced large softwood pulp mills that are coming online in other countries that we're competing with. So I don't think that new pulp mills is ever going to be part of the solution. We have to do absolutely everything that we can to protect the pulp mills that we have left. They've put in significant investments to add value to that pulp within the state of Maine, which has helped them continue to be competitive. But we're not going to see a new competitive standalone pulp mill in the state of Maine. That's just not going to happen. There's a lot of promise for biofuels, for the future of biofuels, filling some of that need. And there are 3 proposed biofuels projects right now. There's one in East Millinocket, one in Lincoln, one at Loring. Those could help. They're scalable. I think we are all very much familiar with our need for some additional domestically produced fuel. So I think that there's a real potential there. But as far as the pulp markets go, we have to do everything that we can to protect the mills that we have left.
Yeah.
So that's worst case scenario. Let's flip it to best case scenario. What can we do? How much can we do? If it all goes right, where do we end up? How much is lost? How much is salvaged?
I mean, if best case scenario, the people watching this podcast are going to have very impact on their lives from the return of the spruce budworm. They're probably not going to realize that it's even here. A lot of the work that's happening is behind the scenes, and aside from some temporary road and trail closures in the spring every year in certain areas, which, the intent is for them to be decreasing in size and in different locations each year, the impact to the general public should be minimal because, as we saw last year and as New Brunswick has proved, that if you are diligent about early detection and getting on top of the budworm population before it starts to spike, then you very much can maintain a healthy forest, even with budworm.
So I want to ask the Forest Service again a couple of questions. When you are looking at sort of the direction that landowners have been going over the last 30 years, they've been spraying for hardwood, trying to keep the number of hardwood trees down to grow fir and spruce. Do you see a change out there in the way that they're managing on the land to get maybe forests with more diversity of the types of trees that are on them? Because when you do go to the northernmost stretches of Maine, they are still really managing towards softwood. And it feels like the more we diversify what's growing in the forest, I think might protect us a little bit more in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, diversity in a forest setting is typically a good idea just because of the native pathogens and insects that might be predating on the health of the forest. So I can't speak too much to what landowners are doing. However, in a situation where there is really high density of spruce, and we believe that the early intervention strategy is the best approach into maintaining the health of the forest stand.
Sure. So, Krista, you want to add to that about what
Sure.
the landowners are doing on the landscape?
Yeah, so the landowners are by successfully implementing an earlier intervention strategy program, we are helping to manage in a mixed age class forest, which is really important. You know, the result of the last budworm outbreak, as we talked about, was large clear cuts that resulted in even age stand coming back. They're also, the ones that are replanting are preferencing for spruce, which, as I mentioned, are far more resilient in the face of the budworm, not their choice host species. And they're also doing some really fascinating work, Irving specifically, at their lab up in New Brunswick. They have come up with a fungus that they inoculate all the trees from their nursery with that budworm don't like. Has no impact on the trees otherwise, but by inoculating these trees and planting out trees on the landscape that we can prove budworm don't like, that will help mitigate future outbreaks as well. And climate change will also come into play. Foreseeably, if climate change goes the way that some are projecting, the next outbreak will likely be to the north of Maine and not in Maine.
Interesting.
Let's talk about this little bug a little bit more for a minute. Tell us something about the life cycle. Why is it that it takes 40 years? Why don't they maintain stable populations? Why do they have these huge cyclical histories?
Yeah, that question is a bit of a can of worms, and
No pun intended.
Oh, pun intended.
It's a can of caterpillars. Is
Yeah,
what it is.
it certainly is, and I think anybody you ask that question to is going to have a different approach on why it's every 40 years. And there's some folks who, will be adamant that it's not every 40 years. It's certainly not year to year, but there's a certain storm of events that are certainly part of the problem. And it's not that it needs 40 years to develop. It's not like a cicada where it's underground for 17 years and then it emerges. It's very much that perfect storm. So you've got the populations that need to be present. They need to have a host to feed on so that they can thrive, eat well, reproduce. And then they have to have an ability to overwhelm their natural enemies. And I think that's the biggest thing. Krista had mentioned that threshold of 7 budworm when we're doing that L2 sampling. And that's because anything more than that, our natural controls that are typically present in our forests don't have the ability to keep budworm in check anymore. So early intervention is never aimed to eradicate budworm by any means. There's still going to be nice pockets of spruce budworm everywhere in the state. But it's just to knock it down enough so that we have those parasitoid wasps and ants and birds that can maintain the population and keep them low.
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned that. Can you tell us a little bit about the spray's impact on birds, other wildlife, water? Because I do think, from what I've heard anyway, that folks that have been promoting the spraying have been very careful in trying to minimize any kind of impact. So I think some of our listeners would be asking the question.
It's always a concern when you start spraying anything.
Absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe how you've addressed some of the public's concerns?
Yeah, certainly. So it's a really great question. And so the 2 products that are being used in early intervention is tebufenicide and BTK. And BTK is essentially short for Bacillus thuringiensis kerstocki.
Say that 3 times.
I know.
I wouldn't have attempted that.
Something about Birkenstocks and
Yes.
Gesundheit.
Thank you. Yes, and so both of these products are very narrow spectrum, meaning that they only impact larvae that are feeding on it at the time of application. Both of them biodegrade, so in sunlight and microbial activity, they're only active and able to affect caterpillars for a short period of time. That's why the timing of the budworm and of the bud development is so critical, because it is a very small window.
I see.
It breaks down in the environment, and if you're also thinking about how these insecticides are being applied, it's to the canopy. It's to the very tops of the trees, because again, it's from a fixed wing, or in this case this year, all helicopter application. And so it's a fine mist that just settles on the tops of the trees. There's a very, very low risk of it actually filtering down into the understory and settling into things like groundwater, soil, or other like hardwoods understory. And all of this is taken in consideration when planning the treatment program. Notably, any kind of water body, stream, lake has been buffered 4 times the legal limit that's on the actual pesticide label requirements.
Wow.
Just out of an extreme abundance of caution to make sure that the insecticide's just going where it's supposed to go, which is the tops of the trees.
That's a lot better than solar development.
Another podcast.
Yeah.
Nice
the
job.
Budworm don't prefer those.
Nice job fitting that in, though. So I find this incredibly interesting because generally we hear political rhetoric that says one thing, and then the facts say another. And when you learn the application and how careful and how many resources are being put into to controlling this insect, it does have implications on every citizen in the state. Because if we lose this forest, if it becomes like it did back when I was a kid, youngster, and I saw it playing out, that will have an impact. Anyone that goes north, it'll affect your recreation. Weather, it'll affect the markets. There's just so many things. Jobs.
It's it would be highly disruptive
Yeah.
if we weren't. The Spruce Budworm Task Force did a study, and they found, I don't have the number right in front of me, but I believe it would have been a $794 million a year problem had we not controlled it, and that was not adjusted for inflation, so that's $2015.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, I alluded to it a little bit before. Anytime you start spraying anything on the landscape, certain people are going to be, at the very least, cautious, and at most, they're going to protest and object. Where's the objection coming from right now?
Yeah, I have heard, just as a state employee, we have our forest health monitoring phones and emails, and so we get all kinds of inquiries about people just wanting more information. And typically people want to know more about the insecticides that are being used. And we have great resources on the Maine Forest website. We've got a really comprehensive list of FAQs that I direct people to. We have the labels for both of the products right on the website, accessible, and I'm always happy to chat people through it. And it's usually just, what's it doing to our trees? What's it doing to our wildlife? Is it getting into the water? What should I be concerned about? Those are most of the phone calls that I'm hearing, and it's easy enough to go through the actual label and talk about all of the precautions that the MBRC is doing with the treatment applications. The fact that it's a narrow insecticide, it's only affecting the caterpillars. It doesn't impact any of the insects that help predate it and keep the populations low. It doesn't impact birds. So there's a lot of good conversations that I've had with folks who have had concerns. The other concern is just the helicopter noise is typically what people just don't want to be bothered by helicopters. And
There's hardly anyone living there where it's being sprayed.
There's enough here.
There's enough to be
That was the case.
there's enough to be annoyed. What about
Also, to make it a little bit more relatable for people, these products are the same products that we use to combat brown-tail moth.
Interesting.
Oh, can I have some?
What about landowners maybe that aren't traditional in the logging industry or part of your association? There are a lot of conservation groups that have bought large chunks of land in the same region. Are they cooperating with a plan? If not, one of my concerns was that if you had a big enough block in which the landowner said, no, we're not doing anything, you could basically have
A holdout.
yeah.
Well, fortunately, as I mentioned, if you're in a hot spot and your neighbors all treat, we're seeing that now if you're within a kilometer, that you are also having benefits from the treatment program around you. So that's helping mitigate some of that. But also I'd like to say, it's true, not all landowners will opt to treat. It's an optional program. The MBRC is inclusive of any landowner, whether it's a commercial forest landowner or an NGO or the state. they're all welcome. The tribes as well have
Yep.
been on some of our calls. They're all welcome to participate. It's an open door. And it's really a voluntary program, as you mentioned, but every landowner doesn't have to treat for it to be effective. That's the good news.
How much money do you have to fight it?
How much money? So last year's program, we received $10 million in natural disaster relief funding from Senator Collins, helped us secure that funding. That was matched with $2 million from the state. Unfortunately, because of the budget process, that money was not available in time for the program last year, so it was carried over to this year's program and is being used for the small landowner program. So if you're a small landowner, there's no cost to you whatsoever. And then the commercial landowners, they were required to pick up 10% of the cost, but in reality, it's more like a 75-25% split between federal and private funding.
Excellent.
This year, I should say, there's an additional $10 million that Senator Collins was able to bring to the state with the support of our delegation. And she's also brought, I believe, $1.2 million for our Spruce Budworm Lab. So now we're not only a resource for Maine, but our Budworm Lab is able to be a resource for our neighboring states as well, as Budworm isn't unique to Maine. So there's monitoring programs that are now happening in New Hampshire, in Vermont, in New York, and Maine's Budworm Lab is able to support our region, not just our state.
Are there any, just to back up a little bit, any big private NGO conservation landowners in the area that have jumped on board with this that you can think of?
I'm not sure that any of them are within the threshold yet.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
It's not been
So
an
it doesn't
issue
apply.
yet. No,
And-
there's some land that's getting closer to the treatment area, but as we saw from last year's map to this year's map, the budworm, pretty much if we treated it last year, unless it's being fed from a local population across the border in Quebec, there weren't really any repeat areas, so it's moving around the landscape, which is what we would expect. But it hasn't been an issue yet because they've had the fortune of avoiding the threshold.
And where is this? You said the map. Where are we talking? What part of Maine?
Yeah, so anyone can find the map. It's on sprucebudwormmaine.org. It's the task force website, and it's an L2 map, and that essentially highlights all of those hot spots that come back after they're sampled and processed by the University of Maine Budworm Lab. And so it's a publicly available map. Anybody can go and see the results of that. This year, it's there's some spots on the western border in northern Maine, but there's also some spots in the Fort Kent surrounding communities.
And I provided maps through Krista, and perhaps that when we produce this podcast for public dissemination, we will include some of those maps.
Yeah, I sent
in
you
a way
some
to
new updated maps
Oh, good.
too
Yeah,
that are
okay.
really fascinating. They show both the outbreak and the treatment areas last year and this year for Quebec versus New Brunswick, and it's just really, it shows how successful last year was. And I'll say last year was our first year with a landscape level EIS program in Maine, but there had been a few the prior years, but they were isolated to one or two landowners that were impacted.
Given the political atmosphere that's out there, one of my concerns, having been in politics for so long, is that our Congress, it's becoming more and more difficult to get stable funding year after year. It feels like we need to have, I guess, more than 1 year's funding,
That would be great.
or we face having done years of work, making progress, and then suddenly the roadblocks we see in Washington, D.C. cause us to have a catastrophe here. And it feels like the delegation should be unified on this and perhaps maybe ask for more than, one appropriation.
Yeah. I am not as familiar with the federal legislation. I know our delegation is all on board with what we're doing. And I believe that there was an effort for 5-year funding for the program,
That sounds
but it
familiar.
hasn't crossed the finish line yet. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of hurdles for any legislation in Washington to make it across the finish line. In the meantime, we've been able to get it in 1 year chunks, but there would be a lot more comfort with the long-term success of the program if we were able to have a stable funding source.
Well, I would look forward to a discussion outside of this podcast with you, Krista, because I do have a few ideas, at least on
You
the
always
state.
do.
Yes, I do. The governor calls me the idea guy. That's why she keeps calling me. But I would like to talk with you. At least if we had our stateside money,
Yeah.
we can say we've done the responsible thing here. We have this money here. As long as we get our federal funding, we can have a full program. And put pressure on the delegation. I wish the candidates would talk more about the issues and less about each other and how much their party stinks
Yeah.
on both sides, and maybe address some of the concerns that Maine people would have about the actual state of Maine.
I will say, and having spoken now with almost every candidate that's running for governor, there's overwhelming support for this program.
It should be
And
easy,
It
then.
crosses party lines because this really isn't about north or south or red or blue. The consequences of losing this battle are too significant, and everybody realizes that.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. Excuse me again,
Go ahead.
Dave. I'm not sure that everyone does, and
I don't.
we should emphasize that because the expanded archery bow hunter in York County or Cumberland County doesn't care what's going on in Aroostook County, theoretically, but they should. People have this idea of wilderness, and for some it's a place that they want to visit or hope that they can visit. For others, it's just the thought that it's there. Well, if it's going to be there, we want to make sure that it's well taken care of, whether we ever get a chance to see it or not. Just for the concept and the idea, but even furthermore for the economic things that you talked about earlier, could have devastating effects that would a domino effect in the timber industry in the state of Maine, which is, I'm not sure if it's 1, 2, or 3, but it's right up there at the top of money making industries in our state. So you got to look at the big picture.
With that, I'll have that conversation with you, Krista. We are forming a much stronger coalition state and nationally through our ILA. And I believe this would be one of our top 5 priorities to get done. And I'm not talking about just getting you funding for 1 year. I'm talking about a long-term plan that we can respond without the obstacles of our current day politics.
Because that's what Sam does for you.
Well done. Well, thank you. to
Yeah,
both
thanks
of you.
very
You've
much.
been great guests.
Thank you.
Very informative. And Krista, I have known you for a while now, and you always bring good issues to the table, and you are very articulate. So appreciate it, both of you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.